All right, y'all, here with another video titled What Become Unreturnable Actually Means. Okay, bear with me. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to change their life completely, only to slowly become the person they used to be? The new relationship ends, the confidence disappears, the weight comes back, the business collapses, the old patterns return. Most people call this failure. I don't. I think something much more interesting is happening. I think that the old identity is trying to go home, because human beings have a powerful tendency to return to what feels familiar, even when familiar is painful. You've heard me say this before in previous videos. And until you understand that mechanism, you'll keep mistaking breakthrough for transformation. Today, I want to explain what become unreturnable actually means. Because it isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming someone the past can no longer organize. If you spent any time in the personal growth world, you've probably heard some version of the same message. Change your habit. Change your mindset. Think positive thoughts. Visualize your future. Set better goals. Work harder. Stay disciplined. And while some of that advice can be useful, I've always felt like it leaves out the most important question. Why do people return? Why do people return to old versions of themselves after breakthrough? Why do people return after healing, after success, after achievement, after manifestation, after all the evidence that they have changed? Because they do. And not occasionally, consistently. People leave people leave toxic relationships and recreate similar dynamics. People achieve goals they've pursued for years and still feel governed by old insecurities. People experience transformation and then slowly drift back into familiar emotional territory. The question that eventually obsessed me was not, how do people change? The question was, why do people return? Because the answer to that question changes everything. Most people assume returning means the change wasn't real. I don't think that's true. I think many breakthroughs are real. I think many achievements are real. I think many manifestations are real. I think many healing experiences are real. The problem is that transformation is often being measured incorrectly. We tend to measure transformation by visible outcomes. Did your circumstances change? Did you get the promotion? Did you lose the weight? Did you get the degree? Did the opportunity arrive? Did the relationship happen? Those things matter, but they don't answer the deeper question. Who are you now? Because circumstances can change before identity does. And when identity remains unchanged, something fascinating begins happening beneath awareness. The psyche starts organizing itself around familiarity, even when familiarity hurts. I call this identity homeostasis. Just as the body tries to maintain physical equilibrium, the psyche often tries to maintain identity equilibrium. It wants to return to what feels known, what feels organizable, what feels familiar, even when familiar is limiting. Even when familiar is painful. Even when familiar is the very thing you say you want to escape. That's why transformation is often much harder than achievement. Achievement changes circumstances, identity. changes gravity, and gravity is what determines where you return. Think about that. Most people are trying to create new outcomes while remaining psychologically organized around old identities. That creates tension because your future may be expanding while your identity is still anchored in the past. And eventually one of those structures win. This is why I became interested in what I look at as the hidden identity loop. I'm not the first person to call this that. I do call this the hidden identity loop. Identity creates behavior. Behavior creates outcomes reinforce identity. Then the cycle repeats. Most people spend their lives trying to change the outcomes while leaving the identity untouched. But outcomes are downstream. Identity is upstream, which means lasting transformation requires something deeper than achievement. It requires reorganization. And this is where the phrase become unreturnable begins. Because becoming unreturnable does not mean becoming perfect. It does not mean never struggling again. It does not mean never feeling fear again. It does not mean becoming immune to old thoughts. It means something much more powerful. It means the old identity stops feeling like home. That is a completely different goal. Many people are trying to eliminate the old self. I don't think that's the task here. The task is to outgrow it, to build a new identity so thoroughly that returning no longer feels natural, no longer feels true, no longer feels like who you are. That is what happened in my own life. Years ago, getting into UCLA represented something much larger than admission. It represented possibility. It represented expansion. It represented proof that I was capable of something I had once believed belonged to other people. And when I was accepted, I thought the achievement itself would solve more than it actually could. What I couldn't understand, or what I did not understand at that time, was that achievement can expose identity structures, not just reward effort. Achievement can reveal fractures. It can reveal assumptions. It can reveal unresolved benefits. And that is exactly what happened, because circumstances changed faster than identity. The dream arrived, but parts of me were still reorganizing around what that dream meant. That realization eventually became one of the foundations of this book, because I started seeing the same pattern everywhere. People think transformation collapses because desire was weak, but often desire isn't the problem. Identity is. And that's where the distinction between breakthrough and stabilization becomes crucial. Breakthrough is an event. Stabilization is a structure. Breakthrough can happen in a moment. Stabilization takes repetition. Breakthrough can change your direction. Stabilization changes your identity. And most people celebrate the breakthrough while neglecting the stabilization. Then they wonder why the old patterns return. The answer is simple. The old identity still has gravitational pull, which brings me to one of the most important ideas in the entire framework: identity gravity. Every identity creates a center of gravity, a familiar way of thinking, a familiar way of feeling, a familiar way of interpreting reality, a familiar way of relating to yourself. The stronger the gravity becomes, the easier it is to return. Unless something stronger is built, that is the work. Not escaping the old gravity, creating a stronger one, creating an identity organized around different assumptions. different beliefs, different evidence, different ways of being. And that takes authorship. Because anything I discovered is that many people are living inside identities they never consciously chose. They never consciously chose. Borrowed identities, inherited identities, family identities, cultural identities, educational identities, religious identities, achievement identities, roles assigned before awareness. And when life is organized around borrowed identities, people often find themselves succeeding according to scripts they never actually wrote. That creates a strange experience. You can achieve everything in the script promised and still feel disconnected from yourself because the achievement and authorship are not the same. At the same point, the question becomes, who wrote this version of me? And if the answer is not you, then authorship becomes necessary. Because becoming unreturnable ultimately requires authorship. It requires consciously participating in who you become, not merely reacting to who you've been. That is why I don't see transformation as self-improvement. I see it as self-authorship, and that distinction matters. Because self-improvement often asks, how do I become better? Authorship asks, who am I becoming? Different question, different destination. And eventually that process creates something extraordinary. A point where the old identity still exists in memory but no longer governs behavior. A point where fear may still appear but no longer feels authoritative. A point where the past remains part of your story but no longer functions as your blueprint. That is becoming unreturnable. Not perfection, not invulnerability, not arrival. Stabilization. There is a line near the end of the book that captures this better than anything else. I broke, but I did not return. That sentence matters because it redefines what success looked like. Success is not never breaking. Success is not never struggling. Success is not never feeling uncertainty. Success is no longer being governed by an identity that once controlled you. Again, that sentence towards the end of the book. I broke, but I did not return. That is the freedom. That is freedom. And if you've ever wondered why you keep returning to old patterns after real growth, maybe the issue isn't discipline. Maybe it isn't motivation. Maybe it isn't self-sabotage. Maybe the old identity still feels more like home than the new one. And if that's true, then the work isn't merely changing your life. The work is changing what feels like home. Because when the new identity becomes stronger than the old one, when authorship becomes stronger than inheritance, when possibility becomes stronger than familiarity, something remarkable happens. The old self loses its authority, and returning stops feeling natural. That is what become unreturnable means. And the question I want to leave you with is simple. What old version of yourself still feels like home? And what would have to change for that to no longer be true? Because that may be where your transformation actually begins. Have a great one.